The man laid 10 priceless furs across the widow's wooden table and quietly said, "One night. That's all I'm asking." What happened in that lonely cabin before sunrise would shatter everything he believed about love, money, and the human heart. Stay with me until the very end, because the widow's answer is something no traveler, no trapper, and no soul in the Old West could have imagined. And it would change a hardened man's life forever. Before we begin this unforgettable journey, take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss another emotional Wild West story inspired by courage, kindness, and unexpected hope. Winter had buried the frontier beneath endless blankets of white. Snow drifted across lonely trails where only wolves and desperate travelers dared to wander after sunset. The mountains stood silent beneath gray skies, their frozen peaks watching over a land where survival often depended on the kindness of strangers. Most cabins kept their doors locked after dark, not because every traveler was dangerous, but because no one could afford to trust the wrong one. A lone rider pushed his exhausted horse through the storm. Thick frost clung to his beard, while snow gathered across the shoulders of his weathered buffalo coat. Hanging from his saddle was a heavy leather duffel, so full that every step of the horse caused it to sway with surprising weight. Inside rested 10 magnificent beaver and silver fox furs, each worth a small fortune in the trading towns hundreds of miles away. The rider was known simply as Caleb Mercer. Fur traders respected his skill, merchants admired his success, and rivals envied the fortune he had built one winter at a time. Yet no one truly knew the man behind the reputation. Every profitable journey ended the same way, with Caleb sitting alone beside a campfire, staring into the flames, while silence surrounded him more completely than the wilderness ever could. Years earlier, greed had cost him everything that truly mattered. While chasing wealth across the frontier, he had ignored the woman who once dreamed of building a family with him. She eventually married another man. Caleb buried his regret beneath years of endless work, convincing himself that money could replace the warmth of a home. It never did. As darkness settled over the mountains, the storm grew fierce enough to erase the trail completely. His horse stumbled through knee-deep snow before Caleb spotted a faint orange glow flickering between towering pine trees. A cabin. Smoke curled gently from its stone chimney. Light danced behind frost-covered windows. Someone was still awake. Relief washed over him as he guided the horse toward the small clearing. The cabin stood humble but well cared for. Freshly chopped firewood rested beneath a shelter. Animal tracks circled the property, but everything appeared peaceful. A lantern swayed beside the front porch, casting soft golden light onto untouched snow. Caleb climbed down carefully, tied his wary horse beneath the awning, and knocked firmly on the thick oak door. For several seconds, only the wind answered. Then footsteps approached. The door opened slowly. Standing before him was a young widow dressed in a simple cream prairie dress beneath a thick wool shawl. Her face carried quiet beauty untouched by vanity. Her eyes were gentle, steady, and surprisingly fearless despite finding a stranger outside her home after sunset. "My name is Caleb," he said, removing his hat respectfully. "The storm caught me on the trail. I'm only asking for shelter until morning." The widow studied him without speaking. She noticed the expensive leather bag, the worn revolver resting peacefully on his belt, the exhaustion hidden beneath his confident posture. Finally, she stepped aside. "Come in before the cold decides for both of us." Warmth embraced Caleb the moment he crossed the threshold. The cabin smelled of pinewood, fresh bread, and cedar smoke. A stone fireplace crackled gently against one wall. Handcrafted shelves displayed carefully folded blankets, jars of preserved vegetables, and neatly stacked books. Everything reflected patience rather than wealth. The widow closed the door behind him. "I'm Anna," she said softly. "You may warm yourself by the fire." Caleb removed his frozen gloves, while quietly observing the room. There were signs that another man had once lived there. An old hunting rifle rested above the fireplace. Large boots still sat neatly beside the entrance. A framed family Bible lay open on a small table. "You live alone?" Caleb asked carefully. "My husband passed away 2 winters ago."
"I'm sorry. So am I."
Neither spoke for several moments. Outside, the wind howled against the cabin walls while snow battered the windows. Inside, only the fireplace filled the silence. Anna poured hot stew into a wooden bowl and placed fresh bread beside it. "You've traveled far."
"I have. You look hungry."
I won't argue with that. She smiled faintly. It was the first genuine smile Caleb had seen in months. As he ate, his eyes wandered toward the leather duffel resting beside the chair. Anna noticed. You're carrying something valuable. My season's work. Furs. The finest I've trapped in years. She simply nodded without asking another question. That surprised him. Most people would have demanded to see them. Instead, Anna cared more about whether his hands had warmed enough to hold the spoon comfortably. The quiet kindness unsettled him in ways the wilderness never had. Hours passed. The storm showed no sign of ending. Caleb understood he could not leave before daylight. Anna prepared a simple bedroll near the fireplace. You may sleep there. He looked around the tiny cabin. And where will you sleep? In the loft. There isn't much room. There doesn't need to be. Caleb hesitated. His eyes drifted toward the leather bag once again. For years, money had solved every problem he encountered. Every closed door had eventually opened for the right price. Every favor had been purchased. Every opportunity had carried a cost. Without thinking, he untied the heavy duffel and carefully placed 10 beautiful furs across Anna's wooden table. Firelight shimmered across their rich silver and dark brown coats. Even together, they could not match the calm expression on her face. They're yours, Caleb said quietly. Anna looked from the furs to the lonely traveler standing before her. What are you asking in return? Caleb lowered his eyes for the first time in years. One night, the cabin fell completely silent. The fire cracked softly. Snow tapped against the window. Anna's answer would not only determine where Caleb slept that night, it would decide the kind of man he would become before the sun rose. The silence inside the cabin seemed louder than the winter storm outside. The fire crackled softly between them, casting warm shadows across the rough, hewn walls. Caleb stood motionless beside the table, unable to meet Anna's eyes. For years he had believed that everything in life carried a price. Land could be bought. Horses could be bought. Loyalty could be bought. Even friendship often disappeared unless a few silver coins changed hands. Somewhere along the endless trails of the frontier, he had begun believing that kindness itself was simply another transaction. Yet as he stared at the 10 luxurious furs spread across the widow's table, a strange feeling crept into his chest. For the first time, he wondered if he had just insulted the only truly good person he had met in years. Anna did not become angry. She did not shout. She did not order him out into the snow. Instead, she quietly walked toward the table and gently rested her fingertips on one of the soft beaver pelts. Then she looked up at Caleb with eyes filled not with outrage, but with sadness. You've been alone for a very long time, haven't you? She asked. The question struck him harder than any fist ever had. Caleb forced a weak laugh. You don't even know me. I know enough. She slowly folded the nearest fur and pushed it back toward him. A man who believes he must pay for warmth has probably gone many winters without finding any. Caleb swallowed hard. Those words slipped past every wall he had spent years building around his heart. I wasn't trying to insult you, he whispered. I only thought. You thought every kindness deserves payment. He nodded. Anna sighed gently before gathering all 10 furs into a neat pile and placing the leather duffel beside him. My husband taught me something before he died. Caleb remained silent. He said that a starving man often asks for bread with shaking hands, but a lonely man asks for love in all the wrong ways. Those words lingered in the room like the smoke rising from the fireplace. For several long moments neither of them spoke. Outside, the blizzard roared across the mountains. Inside, something far more powerful was beginning to melt. Anna walked toward a wooden cupboard and removed another blanket. You'll sleep beside the fire. And you? I'll sleep upstairs like I always do. Caleb looked confused. You're still letting me stay. She smiled gently. I offered shelter before you offered the furs. He stared at her in disbelief. After what I just asked, you asked from loneliness, not cruelty. His eyes slowly filled with emotion. No one had ever understood him that quickly. Not even himself. Anna returned to the small kitchen and began washing the supper bowls. Caleb quietly gathered the expensive furs and returned them to the leather bag. For the first time since trapping them, they felt strangely heavy. Not because of their weight, because they suddenly seemed worthless. After several minutes he spoke again. Can I ask you something? She nodded while drying a wooden plate. Why aren't you afraid of me? Anna smiled without looking up. I prayed before opening the door. Caleb frowned. And I asked the Lord whether the man outside needed protecting from me, or whether I needed protecting from him. What answer did you receive? She looked at him warmly. I believed you were colder inside than outside. Caleb turned away. His throat tightened. He had survived attacks by wolves, freezing rivers, armed bandits, and brutal winters without shedding a tear. Yet the compassion of one quiet widow was breaking him apart. Hours later the fire burned lower. Anna handed him a steaming cup of herbal tea. My husband loved this after long hunting trips. Caleb accepted it carefully. What was he like? Her eyes drifted toward the old hunting rifle hanging above the fireplace. He wasn't rich, she smiled. He never trapped enough to fill 10 bags with expensive furs. But he made everyone around him feel like they already had enough. Caleb stared into the cup. I don't think anyone has ever said that about me. No, she answered honestly. But they still could. That sentence echoed through his heart. Still could. Not too late, not beyond saving. For years Caleb believed a man's story was written by his past. Anna believed it could be rewritten tomorrow. As midnight passed, the storm intensified. A loud crash echoed somewhere outside. Caleb immediately stood. A tree. He grabbed his lantern. I'll check the stable. Anna shook her head. It's dangerous. So is leaving your animals alone. Without waiting for another word, Caleb stepped into the raging snowstorm. The freezing wind nearly knocked him off his feet. He fought through waist, deep drifts toward the small barn behind the cabin. A massive pine had collapsed across part of the roof. Inside, Anna's old mule panicked beneath broken beams. Without hesitation, Caleb climbed into the wreckage. Ignoring splintered wood and falling snow, he lifted the heavy timber enough for the frightened animal to escape. The beam slammed onto his shoulder, throwing him into the frozen ground. Pain shot through his body. Still, he pushed himself back to his feet. By the time he staggered toward the cabin, blood soaked through one sleeve of his coat. Anna gasped as she opened the door. You're hurt. It's only a scratch. It certainly is not. She guided him inside before he could protest. Sitting him beside the fire, she carefully cleaned the deep cut with warm water and homemade herbs. Caleb winced. You've done this before. My husband had a talent for returning home injured. She wrapped clean linen around his arm with remarkable gentleness. Caleb watched her quietly. You didn't have to do this. She tied the final knot. Kindness doesn't become expensive simply because someone doesn't deserve it. Those words stole the air from his lungs. He realized something that terrified him. He had spent years earning fortunes. Yet tonight, sitting inside a tiny log cabin with a bandaged arm and a bowl of simple stew, he felt richer than he ever had. Before either of them could speak again, 3 loud knocks echoed through the cabin door. Not polite knocks, heavy, demanding, the kind that usually arrived with trouble. Caleb instinctively reached for his revolver. Anna's peaceful expression suddenly changed. She whispered only 4 words. They've found me again. The door shook beneath another violent pounding, and Caleb realized the greatest test of his life had only just begun. The pounding on the cabin door grew louder with every passing second. Caleb stepped in front of Anna without hesitation, resting one hand on the grip of his revolver. Stay behind me, he whispered. When he opened the door, 3 rough-looking men stood outside, covered in snow. Their leader smirked as he recognized Anna. We've come for the money your husband owed. Anna shook her head. He owed nothing. You know that. The man laughed. Truth doesn't matter out here. Before another word could be spoken. Leave. The leader looked him up and down. And who are you? Just a traveler. A traveler willing to die for someone he met tonight. Caleb answered calmly. A good person is worth protecting, even if you've only known them for an hour. The men exchanged uneasy glances. They expected fear, not quiet confidence. When Caleb slowly opened his coat, revealing his revolver and the scars earned from years on the frontier, they realized this was no ordinary traveler. You don't want this fight, Caleb said. After a tense silence, the leader spat into the snow. This isn't over. It is tonight. The 3 men mounted their horses and disappeared into the storm. Anna let out a long breath she had been holding for what felt like forever. You didn't have to risk your life. Caleb smiled softly. I know. As dawn broke over the snowy mountains, golden sunlight poured through the cabin windows. Caleb picked up his leather duffel and placed it on the table. This time, he said, I want you to accept something. Anna looked at him, not as payment, as gratitude. He offered her 2 of the finest furs. She hesitated before accepting them with tears in her eyes. I'll use these to repair the barn and help families who struggle through the winter. Caleb smiled. I knew you would. Before leaving, he looked around the warm little cabin one last time. The night before, he had entered believing wealth could buy anything. Now he understood that compassion was worth more than every fur he had ever trapped. Months later, travelers passing through the mountains began hearing stories of a wealthy fur trader who no longer bargained with desperate people. He built shelters along dangerous trails, left food for strangers caught in storms, and quietly paid debts for widows who had nowhere else to turn. Whenever someone asked why he had changed, Caleb simply smiled and replied, "One winter night, a widow refused my fortune and gave me something far more valuable." Sometimes the greatest gifts are not the ones we receive. They are the lessons that transform who we become. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who still believes kindness can change a life. Because in the Old West, the strongest people were never the richest or the fastest with a gun. They were the ones whose hearts remained warm, even in the coldest winters.